Right, welcome to this video presentation on the search for perfection and the need for precision. Before I talk about what we're going to cover in this presentation, I just want to introduce myself. The person who's talking is Andrew Menaker, and I am a full-time trader. I focus mostly on the S&P 500 E-mini futures. I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and I have spent well over 10 years working with both institutional traders, consulting with institutional money managers, as well as working with retail traders. And as you go over the legal disclaimer, I just want to tell you a little bit more about this presentation. The title of the presentation is The Search for Perfection and the Need for Precision, which in my experience, my personal experience as a trader as well as working with other traders, I've seen how that need for perfection and precision is a very strong motivation for some people, and it can actually be very counterproductive. I also just want to say that this video presentation, I'm not intending to cover all of the problems and all the psychology around trading. And really, essentially what I want to say here is this, is that there comes a point in the journey of a trader where the search for the Holy Grail really needs to be turned inward rather than looking for indicators and other setups. This particular presentation today is not intended to cover everything there is to know about the need for perfection in the search for precision. And it's not intended to be a comprehensive remedy if these are issues that you grapple with. My objective here in this presentation is simply to lay some groundwork about these issues, and hopefully in doing so, something may strike a chord with you. And if it does, then it would be in your best interest to follow up on it and do something about it. A lot of material within the world of trading psychology, a lot of content, and a lot of different issues that people deal with. And although there's a lot of common mental traps, a lot of common errors in trading psychology, even though there are commonalities to those, usually the internal experience of those are going to be unique to the individual. And it's because of that I'm not intending to cover all the bases, I should say, covering everything under the sun that there is to cover about trading right here in this presentation. I'm just going to scratch the surface, and I'm just going to go at it from one particular angle, and that's the angle of people who have a strong need for perfection. When I do my one-on-one coaching with people, what I do there is we will focus on the very individualized aspect as terms of how they experience, if they do, how they experience any need for precision and a search for perfection that they feel that they're compelled for or compelled into. And so in other words, with my coaching, what we do is we look at it on a very individual, unique basis. And this presentation is really just a broad-based presentation, and it's not going to, it's not intended to kind of cover everything under the sun here. Okay, like I said, I'm not going to go into great detail here, but I do want to summarize some of the major causes of perfectionism, perfectionist tendencies. And generally speaking, many perfectionists learned early in life that they were valued and or they were rewarded based upon what they achieved or how much they accomplished. And this often creates a set of internal dynamics where the person learns to value him or herself based on a combination of what they've achieved and whether they were rewarded or highly valued by others. Someone with perfectionist tendencies is usually highly conscious and hypercritical of any signs of mistakes, and often spends a lot of mental energy, and energy here equals attention, a lot of mental energy on details. There's a concept in psychology known as the inner critic, which is a major issue in and of itself for many people. And it also plays a large role in the maintenance of perfectionism over time throughout your life. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the inner critic here because that's a whole other topic in and of itself. And there are lots of ways of dealing with perfectionism. And one common way is to kind of approach it through the angle of your inner critic, or working with an inner critic, that type of a construct. It can be very productive. And it's something that I do sometimes with a coaching client if it appears that that's an issue for them. By the way, the inner critic also plays a role in self-confidence. There are other ways of dealing with the need to be perfect, and working with the inner critic is just one possibility. Beneath all of this, at a very core level, is often a very deep and to some degree subconscious emotion, usually some form of fear. Each person might have a unique inner experience of this, primarily because we didn't all grow up the same way with the same parents. And we all have different current circumstances in our lives and different brain chemistry as well. This means that what works for one person may not work as well for someone else. I've talked to many people who've read books or taken a class or a workshop where they received information about various mental or trading psychology issues, but not everyone responds the same way to the same information or the same set of techniques. When I was looking for an image for this particular slide, I really liked this image quite a bit because it says a lot. Perfectionists very often will miss the big picture, or they pay very little attention to context. They lose the forest for the trees. And they become quite myopic and miss important patterns. And this is how it works for traders. Is very often somebody with a strong need for perfection, or is constantly searching for perfection, will miss particular patterns because they are so focused on specific details in some other area of the market or some other aspect of their trading. In some ways, it's a bit similar to the person who constantly looks at their P&L throughout the day and is so focused on achieving something that most of their mental energy is dedicated not to observing what is actually happening in the market, like noticing what the market is doing and how good of a job it is doing. As traders, we must find ways to see what the market is doing without imposing our own personal needs upon it. Okay, I'm going to say that again, and this is a really critical concept that a lot of people, they might understand intellectually, and they've most likely read it somewhere or heard it from someone, but they've usually on some level have not been able to internalize this in terms of how they behave and how they act. I'll say this again. As traders, we must find ways to see what the market is doing without imposing our own personal needs upon it. Someone with perfectionist tendencies will often have a very high standard that they feel is critical to meet, and will go to great lengths to meet that standard. For some, it includes even self-punishment, whether the punishment is conscious or subconscious. As we strive to achieve perfection, it may be helpful to look at where the standards or the benchmark that we've created comes from. Does one's need for perfection come from internal or more from external expectations? It's usually some combination of both, but very often one may be stronger than the other, the internal or the external. Different people will have different experiences and will not all respond the same way to a given strategy for weakening the need for perfection. Because that's really what I'm trying to say here, is that obviously as a trader we're never going to be perfect, and if you have a strong need for perfection, you're really going to be hitting your head against the wall quite a bit. The market is constantly changing, right? And I've talked about this in other presentations, how the market is constantly sending us ambiguous information, ambiguous signals. So in an environment like the market that's constantly changing, there's no such thing as a perfect or an always good decision, right? Whatever we decide to do, I'll give you an example. Let's say you're already made your entry, you're in a trade, and you have a particular target in mind, and let's say the market gets to your target, and you close out of your trade. Now let's say it continues to go past your target and further in your direction beyond your target. Well, you're going to feel bad because you left money on the table. It's going to feel like a less than perfect trade. Likewise, if price doesn't get all the way to your target, and you're waiting for your target for it to get there, you're going to feel very upset that it didn't get to your target. The only times you're actually going to feel any kind of sense of perfection, and these are pretty much rare instances, is when price does exactly what you wanted it to do, or exactly what you were expecting it to do, and nothing less and nothing more in the exact time frame that you were expecting it. Now, how often does that happen? Not very often. So right there you can see that you're not going to the need for perfection, or the search for perfection, you need to kind of, I'm going to say, give up on it here, because really it's very, very, very rare that you're actually going to experience perfection as a discretionary trader. We probably all have perfectionist tendencies in certain areas of our life, and perfectionism can be an asset in many instances. But as a discretionary trader, especially as a discretionary short-term trader, it can be very counterproductive. A trader with a high degree of perfectionism is trying to be the best. Nothing wrong with that. But it also means that in the process of striving for perfection, they may spend copious amounts of time on details and getting themselves locked into a mindset where they have to achieve perfection, they have to be right. And unfortunately, that search for perfection, there's a strong relationship with that old nemesis of the trader, the need to be right. Now, I'm not going to talk about the need to be right necessarily here. I don't want to go off in that direction. I want to stay focused more on perfection and precision, or the need for those, and how they can be counterproductive. But obviously, you can begin to see the relationship between all that and the need to be right. Someone with strong tendencies for perfection is often worried about meeting expectations, and they try very, very hard to be perfect. There is usually a strong fear of failure as well. There is a strong need to see a perfect product, right? All of us have that on a certain level. And for traders, this can mean a perfect entry or a perfect exit, or a fixation on not losing. Of course, ego issues may be involved here, and they usually are. But for the purpose of this presentation, I won't be talking about ego needs in particular. I'm really going to be talking about perfection and precision from a different angle. I do talk about ego needs and the need to be right in another presentation, and I certainly talk about that with my coaching and consulting clients, because that is a very big and very important area that most traders are usually experience as an obstacle. So some people who are listening to this presentation may be asking themselves at this point, they might be saying something like, well, but shouldn't we create and work toward an ideal image of ourselves, or at least an image of successful trading? Something to do with visualization, or maybe affirmations possibly, or just at least a vision, or an ideal image of what a good trader is. And I would say yes, that is a good idea, and that's something that you want to do. But it's often done, let me back up. Unfortunately, many people spend an awful lot of time focusing on creating that ideal image of successful trading, or themselves as a successful trader, and they do it in such a way that it doesn't really result in long-lasting behavior change. And I think it's because there's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is that if you have underlying issues, underlying emotions like fear or strong ego needs, and other types of emotional issues, for lack of a better, I don't want to get lost in other details here, but if you have other strong emotional issues or needs going on, and you simply are working towards creating a positive image of yourself and a positive image of your trading, then what you're really doing is you have kind of a shaky foundation, because yes, you may create this positive image through your affirmations and visualizations, but that image, like I said, is on a shaky foundation, because underneath that, inside that foundation, on the interior, there are still going to be some doubts and some fears, and you need to, in my opinion, deal with the underside, really what's underneath the hood, if you will. Not only just focus on creating a positive image. You have to be doing both. You have to create a positive image, but you also have to be looking at what's underneath the hood and what's really there in your foundation. A lot of coaches will tell you to use affirmations and visualizations, and that may often be the primary tool that is used. And I think it's a good tool, but it should never be just the only or the primary tool. There's nothing wrong with that tool. It's a great tool, and I use it myself. And there's a place for affirmations and visualizations, obviously. I think it's a critical part of transformation. But all too often, I can't emphasize this enough, that the strategies that are taught are really more about positive thinking than actual deep change. Now, positive thinking is good, but positive thinking doesn't usually result in actual long-lasting, significant, deep change unless you actually deal with what is going on beyond the positive thinking, underneath the positive thinking. Because I'll tell you, and I'll be really honest, as much as I create a positive image for myself, and as much as I want to create an ideal image of who I want to be and where I want to be in my life and what kind of trader I'm always working on becoming, there are always going to be negative emotions. There are always going to be doubts and fears. And if I ignore those emotions, they will creep into my experience usually in such a way as they end up manifesting as counterproductive behaviors. So what I'm saying here is that positive thinking is necessary, but it's not sufficient on its own. Creating positive thoughts and ignoring negative feelings, I should say, or negative thoughts, is, well, let me just put it to you this way. The way I would suggest you do it, this is what I do when I work with clients, and this is what I do for myself, is that I create positive thoughts, and I'm also looking at the feelings, whether the feelings are positive or negative that are associated with all of my thoughts. And I can tell you that if the root of the problem is not dealt with, that if you're only looking at just the positive thoughts and ignoring any kind of negative emotion, then all the affirmations and positive thinking in the world is not going to result in long-lasting behavior change. I just want to say something, just a brief word about thoughts, emotions, and beliefs. And someone who's listening to this may be wondering, what is my thinking? What is how do I approach that? Some people believe that thoughts come first and emotions come second, or vice versa. Neurolinguistic programming says that it all begins with your beliefs and your values, and then emotions flow from there. Honestly, my opinion is that that's all academic debate, and I try and be as practical as possible. And in my approach to trading psychology, it's not important, in my opinion, to determine what comes first, the thought or the belief or the value or the emotion. That's all debatable. But what I focus on is the relationship between thoughts and emotions and beliefs. That's what's important. It's the relationship between those. And even more important than the relationship is this. We want to be focusing and working on that space between whether it's a thought or emotion and the behavior that follows. In other words, it's the behavior or our action that follows the thought or the emotion. In that space, there's a brief moment or space, if you want to look at it in terms of distance, but there's a very small opportunity. There is a window of opportunity to work within that space in terms of being able to understand the relationship between our behavior that follows from an emotion or a thought. And that, in my opinion, is where most of the critical work with trading psychology has to occur, on that level. And now, when the work occurs on that level is when people will experience long-lasting, sustained change. I know that all this talk about the search for perfection and the need for precision may sound a bit alarming to some people because I'm putting it into kind of somewhat of a negative context for trading, for discretionary trading. So I just really want to clarify something here. And what I want to say is this. Not all high achievers are obsessed with perfection. A high achiever who is not driven by a need for perfection is usually pulled, in a sense, I'll say that again, it's kind of like they're being pulled toward their goal. And they will focus not just on the outcome, but also on the process of achieving their goal. So their focus is not just on the end product or the outcome or the result. It's as if they are being pulled along instead of being pushed. They often enjoy the process of striving for a goal, as if the process is pulling them. In fact, many high achievers will say that they enjoy the process of getting there as much, if not more, than the actual end result or the outcome itself. Now, on the other hand, someone with a strong need for perfection tends to feel pushed internally or externally. They're feeling pushed to achieve perfection. Usually there is a good amount of fear associated with the pushing, a fear of not reaching their goal and seeing anything less than perfection as failure. They often don't enjoy the process so much, or they may think that they enjoy the process because they've convinced themselves that the process is simply an obstacle to overcome for the perfect outcome. But in the final analysis, they are still pushed by the fear of failure or the need to avoid failure. What happens is that they are unable to enjoy or learn from the process. I suppose it's possibly almost needless to say, but I'm going to say it anyways, that someone with a strong need for perfection is often caught in a vicious cycle. The need for perfection fuels itself. It keeps pushing. The cycle can be a bit different in terms of the order in which it occurs, or the steps in which these occur, but in general, the vicious cycle of perfection will usually have many of the following aspects that push the cycle along. Extremely high or unrealistic goals, failure to meet the goals, lowered self-confidence when the actual results are not perfect, constant pressure or pushing to meet the goal, and becoming overly self-critical. So when someone is caught in this cycle, or when you're caught in this cycle, you may develop hesitation or possibly procrastination. Hesitation, not pulling the trigger, is a very common one. Here, it's probably one of the biggest complaints that I hear from traders is that they saw what they were supposed to do, but they couldn't do it, and they hesitated. Because they're so worried about doing it perfectly that they become immobilized, and so they don't do anything at all instead. There's a lot of difficulty in entering a trade, and I think that also actually exiting the trade is really harder. That's a whole other thing that I talk about. Entries are relatively the easy part of trading. It's really where to get out, whether it's with a profit or a loss, is really the hard part. But oftentimes I will say that if somebody has difficulty just even entering a trade, it's often an expression of this very problem, the need for, or the search for perfection. Some people with a strong need for perfection can become defensive also, because an imperfect performance or outcome is scary and painful, and they tend to take even constructive criticism or advice defensively. A high achiever does not have a strong need for perfection. I should say, let me back up. A high achiever who does not have a strong need for perfection has the capacity to see criticism as potentially valuable feedback, I should say, to help them achieve their goals. A lower need for perfection is often associated with more resiliency, or the capacity to bounce back after a mistake or a loss. A couple of common mental or psychological traps that are sometimes associated with perfectionism include confirmation bias and anchoring. And I cover a lot of various mental and psychological traps with my coaching clients because, like I said earlier in this presentation, I think it was in the introduction, that there's a lot of common mental traps that we all get caught in. But one of the things as a coach and as a consultant that I've discovered along the way, and also from my own personal trading journey, is that although the mental traps might be ubiquitous, they are common, and they are experienced widely by almost all traders, the actual inner experience of those traps is very, very unique and different. And so many times finding a way around those traps sometimes takes an individualized approach, and just reading a book is oftentimes not enough for people. Just want to say a word about the need for precision, and again, this is in the context of discretionary trading. Okay, I'm assuming that I'm a discretionary trader, and I'm assuming that who's ever listening to this presentation is a discretionary trader and not a systems or automated systems trader. But in discretionary trading, 2 plus 2 does not always equal 4. As discretionary traders, we need some rules to keep us in the game. Rules around money management and risk management are really the critical rules that we should always have. However, if we get too stuck on particular rules, if we get too stuck on a particular way that something has to happen, or a particular format or a particular appearance of something, then what happens is we have a very strong need for precision at that point. And the reality is that the market is not precise. The market is essentially just a mass of emotion, emotion on a very mass level. Yes, there are computer trading programs and algorithms that might be responsible for a large amount of the volume these days, but who programs those? Who creates those programs? It's humans. And so really, what we're looking at with the market here, the reality of the market, is that there's a lot of emotion in the market. And if we are looking for precision all the time, we're not going to find it in general, and we're going to be very, very frustrated. When one focuses on not just looking for precision or for a precise level or precise action in the market, but when one is focusing on achieving precision for themselves, we're also engaging in logical thought, and there's nothing wrong with logical thought. First of all, I just want to say that it's a good thing, but it requires a balance. You know, the logical thinking requires a balance with creative or non-linear thinking. Otherwise, what will happen is that our thought process can become overly rigid, and we're less capable of interpreting a dynamic process like the market, which is in constant motion with unseen and unknowable forces. You know, obviously, I'm not suggesting that someone with a strong need and a well-honed ability for precise thinking ignore it or alter it. It's an asset. If you have a lot of ability to think in precise terms, that's an asset. I'm not saying you should stop doing that. With coaching clients, I take the approach that we all have different strengths and weaknesses, and what may be a strength for one person may be a weakness for someone else, and vice versa. It's always a good idea to do more of what works and less of what doesn't, and to build up our strengths as much as possible, and also to kind of look at where our weak points are, and not, at least at minimum, don't allow our weak points to be so exposed or minimize the amount of time that we function from those weak points. I'm going to make a controversial statement here, and I'm sure some will react to this, but I will say it anyway. Many discretionary traders, in an attempt to rely on rules, end up subconsciously projecting their own rules onto the market, their own inner mental, emotional rules onto the market, and also the rules for how they believe the market should be behaving. They project their own rules onto the market, and this can often result in a rather rigid view or opinion of how the market should move. Likewise, someone with perfectionist tendencies will often expect others, including the market, to behave in a certain way. And when someone is thinking along those terms, or if that describes you, then I would probably also make an educated guess and say that you probably trade in such a way that you might be overly mechanistic. You're not very fluid or flexible in your approach, and it probably takes you a while to recognize a change of direction in the market. You might end up taking a little longer than you could otherwise in terms of recognizing new emerging patterns, price patterns in the market and whatnot. It might basically, in a sense, is what I'm saying is that you're not really functioning at your full capability, even though you think you are, because you have a lot of precision in your thinking. You actually have left out a lot of information that's in front of you because you're really trying to fit everything that you see and perceive into a precise map that you've already created for yourself. Internal map, I should say. Often people coming into trading with a background or a previous successful career that relied heavily on logic or precision such as a lawyer or engineer or a programmer, other types of professions like that. Such people are often the type of trader that attempts to view the market with precision, and sometimes they will also have an all or nothing way of looking at their world and the market. And this black and white thinking leaves no room for gray. And as discretionary traders, it's usually all about the gray. We're never going to get in at the absolute. We're never going to buy at the absolute bottom and sell at the absolute top. I mean, we may occasionally, but when we do, that's going to be few and far between. For the most part, we're going to be almost always operating in the gray area. The market's job is to facilitate trade for buyers and sellers. Okay, the market is a true auction environment, and if you've ever been to a live auction in person, you know that humans can be less than logical. The market's job is to facilitate trade, and if we approach the market by superimposing a mechanical model of what we think it should be doing, we will miss a lot of information and a lot of opportunity. If I were to list a number of things that one can do to reduce the need for perfection and the search for precision in trading, then the number one thing would be stop searching outside yourself for the answers. The holy grail of trading lies within you. It doesn't have much to do with perfection either, I can tell you. As a discretionary trader, successful, consistently profitable trading has very, very, very little to do with perfection and precision. Very little. Once you understand how to read the market and you have setups that you have confidence in, it all comes down to money management, risk management, and how you decide to take action. It's nothing more than those three items. Money management, which is your position sizing, risk management, which is how much you're willing to lose, and how you decide to take action. Many discretionary traders with a strong need for perfection and who continuously search for a high degree of precision but are not trading as well as they would like are, in my professional opinion, functioning with an unhealthy combination of, and this is really what I want to talk a lot about here, is that they have an unhealthy combination of high expectations and low self-confidence. If expectations are unreasonably high, it often results in lowered self-confidence when the actual result doesn't measure up with the expectation. So here is, in a sense, I guess one could say it's a secret formula for success, because it's not a formula that many people talk about, but it's a very important formula. A lot of athletes are very familiar with this. A lot of coaches and sports psychologists are very familiar with this concept, but it hasn't really worked its way much into other areas very much. But I want to introduce this idea to you, and that is you take the normal situation, which is high expectations plus low self-confidence, and instead you replace the high expectations with process goals. Or in other words, rather than a focus on the outcome or a focus on high expectations, you focus on process or specific steps along the way. You focus on the actual process and how you get there, not actually getting there. And so you replace high expectations with process goals, and you replace low self-confidence with high self-confidence. So rather than having high expectations plus low self-confidence, the formula should be process goals plus high self-confidence. And if you can focus more on the process and let go of the actual outcome and let go of a perfect result, then, and you can do this while you maintain self-confidence, high self-confidence, that I can almost guarantee you will improve your trading in and of itself. Now there are particular strategies and techniques that are used that are different for different people, and a lot of those strategies and techniques involve dealing with the emotional content that's going on here. And I'm not going to get into that on this presentation because that would take too long, and it wouldn't be of great service to people either, because a lot of people have different experiences with these emotions, and when I say something about it, not everybody who's listening to this is going to agree, or some people may be scratching their head even. But really, just to suffice to say, when the right strategies are employed, then the trader often feels as if their process is kind of like pulling them along toward their goals. Okay? Traders that I've worked with around this particular issue have described it as a surprisingly gratifying experience, and they usually end up learning more about being a better trader and about themselves in the process than they thought was even ever possible. Well, that concludes this presentation on perfection and precision. And if you would like more information about this, and if you are not a current coaching client, then you can contact me at popdoc111, popdoc111 at gmail.com, or my website at popdoctrader.com or andrewmenaker.com. I do have a copyright on this material, and I would appreciate it if you do not record it or post this on any other venue. Thank you.